Good afternoon. Welcome to this edition of Faith, Family, and Political Affairs. We come to you today to give an update on this latest development with Nolan Xavier Wells' autopsy report. As you know, on Wednesday morning, the attorney for the family, Mr. Ben CRUMP, joined the family in a press conference in Chicago at the NAACP offices there to announce formally the results of the second autopsy, which they sponsored. Of course, the state of Mississippi had the initial access to young Nolan's body, and they have conducted their own autopsy. But the results of their autopsy are from the reporting. The results have not been made available to the family, nor have those results been made available to the general public. Of course, this is such a high-profile case, and it has, I think it's safe to say, captured the attention of the nation. The loss of such a young life under what seemed to be suspicious, at best, circumstances. Still has not led the state of Mississippi to share any findings from their autopsy. And many say that their investigation has been less than standard. But we still must move forward with what we do know, because the Wells Wansley family, Miss Christine Wells, Nolan's mom, and his dad, Mr. Elmore Wansley, they deserve answers to what happened to their son on what was meant to be a weekend of celebration and preparation for, on Monday of following the weekend, he was to start training for a college football career. As I said, this loss has been so tragic and so surprising that people are just enthralled, and people cannot turn away from every development in the case. And Mrs. Wells Wansley had asked the general public that we all keep her son's name, young Nolan's name, in the public, that we continue to say it, and that we don't let his story go untold. So as Attorney Ben Crump likes to say, justice for Nolan Xavier Wells is what is guiding this episode of Faith, Family, and Political Affairs. So at the press conference held on Wednesday, I'm taping this on Wednesday night to be published and shared with my audience on Thursday. What was most clear from the report that Attorney Crump shared, what was most clear is that there is still much left to be found out about what happened to young Nolan. Officially, the cause of death is being described as undetermined pending investigation. The manner of death is being similarly described as undetermined pending investigation. The way the attorney explained it, of course, because this is the second autopsy, the doctor who performed this autopsy had to wait for the body to be delivered to him from the Mississippi coroner. And so just simply because of doing an autopsy after someone else has done one, there are limitations to what could be discovered. I have to put a note in there that the autopsy itself and the transport of young Nolan's remains to Washington, D.C., where this second autopsy was performed, was all paid for by former NFL player Colin Kaepernick. The autopsy itself was performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr. of the American Medical Association. The key components of the autopsy results, again, which are inconclusive, noted red discoloration in the back of Nolan's head. The examiner was clear to say it was not determined what caused this red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of his head. There was also marked decomposition of the body, which of course that's not so surprising since we know he had been in the water. There are no details as to how he came to be in the water or how long he was in the water. There were several key body parts, and I must apologize for the detailed nature of this. And I have to say, the family being in the room as all of this was announced had to be especially difficult for them to hear. But it was noted that some of Nolan's body parts were not delivered to this second examiner, perhaps because the Mississippi coroner had not completed all of his investigations or her investigations. And so because perhaps they are waiting a toxicology reports in the same way that the second autopsy is awaiting the toxicology reports that they need to draw conclusions about cause of death. Perhaps that is why some experts are saying that Mississippi officials have not turned over all of his body parts to this second examiner. However, Attorney CRUMP did see fit to name some of those parts that are missing, that are critical to determining cause of death. And as he noted, these are what the second examiner noted. There was no tissue from Nolan's throat included, which would have been useful in helping to see if there was any trauma to the front part of his neck, since they know that there was the red discoloration at the back of his head. But because there was no throat tissue, there could be no determination as to what happened or did not happen to his throat and neck area. The lungs, the brain, and the stomach were also kept in Mississippi with that examiner. Of course, these are all critical to determining cause of death and determining time of death. One standard part of any autopsy, from my understanding, is stomach. What is in the stomach cavity? From that information, a coroner can tell when the last time was that the person ate, which helps to determine time of death. So with that information missing, that limits this examiner's ability to determine cause of death or time of death. The lungs being missing from, the word missing has to be, used carefully here, because in essence, what is meant is that they were not shared with the second examiner. The parts are there with, we assume, with the Mississippi coroner, but they are missing from this autopsy and from this examination of young Nolan's remains. But without the lungs, this examiner is not able to determine if water was in the lungs, which would, signify a drowning death. And the absence of water, from my understanding of the explanation, the absence of water in the lungs could help to rule out drowning as the cause or manner of death. So without that piece, knowing whether or not there was water in his lungs, that is a major limitation in being able to say what has happened to young Nolan. We have to say that the expert examiner, Dr. Mitchell, was very careful not to draw any conclusions from his examination for the very reasons that I just mentioned. Much of the critical remains, much of young Nolan's remains were not available to him. So he examined what he could and included that in his autopsy report. Certainly with a case that is so high profile as this one is, there is some pressure, I'm sure, on the officials to present some evidence as to how young Nolan died. However, because this is such a serious matter and experts do what they do, they take their time to look at the evidence, hopefully without any bias, to determine what happened. So if that, in the end, if from their examinations, we have 2 examinations, autopsies, we know, so perhaps there will be some comparing of the results of each, before this is all said and done. But we repeat that the Mississippi authorities have not released any results of their findings, and they've had the body, from my understanding, since July 6th, 2 days after young Nolan traveled to Horn Island with his friends for that 4th of July weekend. So because these coroners, there are 2 autopsies now, and as I said, the hope is that there will be some comparing of results. Certainly if those results are in line, or if they align and they are the same or similar, then we can say that for sure that there is truth in what they find. However, if it's anything like these investigations have been, where there are basically sometimes just two very different accounts of what has gone down. For example, the young men who Nolan traveled to the island with and who left him on the island and took his cell phone with them, they have reportedly said that he wanted to stay on the island because he met a young woman who he wanted to get to know better. However, there are reports that investigators have spoken with this young woman whose name is Katie, and that's all we know, that she reportedly has told people that Nolan told her that he was going back to get on the boat with his friends. So that is a major conflict of the accounts. Did he go back? We know that he did not go back and get on that boat. We know that. And we now know that Katie left the island. She left with other friends, apparently thinking that Nolan had left with his friends. So, and that's just one of the conflicting reports. Of course, by now you've heard that there was a voice of some altercation going on, and there was a voice of someone saying, "Give me back my phone. What are you doing?" And some people have said that was Nolan saying to his friends, "Give me back my phone." On the other hand, there's a report of a young man. I forget his name. I believe it was Tristan. He said that that was him, that he was in some kind of confrontation with some people over his phone. So that's another conflict in the reporting of, in the accounts of what happened on that day. So we just hope that these two different autopsies will not similarly conflict. But just because of the limitations of the second examiner, of course, they noted marked decomposition of the body, which makes it difficult for the second autopsy to reveal anything conclusive, which in my mind puts even more responsibility on the person or people performing the first autopsy who had initial access to these remains to share with the public and with the family of young Nolan what they found. It would just stand to reason that the autopsy performed closest to the discovery of his body would be shared with the family and those representing the family to give them some closure and to give them some idea of what happened to young Nolan. In addition to the actual autopsy results and the examination of his body, of his remains, what still is emerging as a major point of contention is Nolan's cell phone. There is still there is a lot of concern about items, concerns that the phone was wiped. His mother suggested right away that her son was a person who always took photos and videos constantly and was always posting and sharing those. Yet when they received his phone from those friends who he had traveled to the island with, when they retrieved his phone, and of course they had to track the phone, these friends did not volunteer the phone. Mrs. Wells Wansley had to track the phone, and she sent a friend of hers to pick up the phone from these friends. but it has troubled her from the beginning that there were no photos and no videos on her son's phone. And she said that was highly unusual and gave her great concern. I've of late been following the Nancy Grace. She's a, if you don't know of her, she's so famous. I'm sure you've heard of her. She's a TV crime investigator. She gets into some of the most high profile cases and just has, in a dogged way, just persists until she gets answers on what has happened in a number of very prominent cases. But she also takes some cases that are not so highly profiled. And because she is who she is, she enhances the profile of some cases. But of course, young Nolan's case is already nationally, already figures very prominently on the national scene. But she is taking up this investigation as a hot topic on her show, um, which is called Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. And they can be located, it can be located on YouTube. If you just would type in Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, and you should be able to find her. But she had a very interesting panel discussion about the cell phone, where she spoke with a forensic digital expert who, and she asked questions about, could items that had been deleted be recovered? Would there be any way for those to be recovered? And the young lady who the expert said that yes, most times deleted items are recoverable. She made a difference between an iPhone and an Android phone, however. She said that chances of recovering photos, videos, any materials on an Android, chances are better if they are searched for within a few days of having been taken, of the pictures or videos being taken. Whereas on an iPhone, she said those materials can be retrieved as far out as 30 days from the time that they were taken. So this to me was very interesting and I found quite encouraging after hearing, so much inconclusive commentary about the autopsy. It to me was a little bit refreshing to think that his phone, if it were the case that someone wiped his phone, as his mother seemed to fear, that those items could be retrieved, especially if it's an iPhone. And so that was quite interesting. And not only could the items be retrieved, this expert explained that the phone would be able to tell them, a forensic person would be able to tell them how many times someone even touched the phone, or how many times someone attempted to delete something or attempted to get into the phone. Because, most of us have password protected phones. And for someone who did not know Nolan's password, they might have had a difficult time and have had to try several times to get into his phone. This expert said that that kind of information would certainly be traceable. So that phone becomes even more and more important as these investigations progress. Which I have to say, the fact that Nolan's mom had the presence of mind and all that was going on when she learned that her son had not come back with the other boys, the other young men. She still had the presence of mind to track it. She had a tracker on his phone, but she had the presence of mind to use that to locate the phone and then to have someone go immediately and pick up the phone. What is amazing to me as a former newspaper reporter, a crime reporter too, I did some reporting in a small town, some coverage of the court system, police department and sheriff department and courts. But what is amazing to me in that whole scenario is that when you have a child missing or any person missing, you would think that the authorities would have gone to pick up that phone. They would have been involved to help her locate that phone and help her go get that phone. Because what if there was some danger in that for her, for her and her husband, or the young woman, or the person who actually did go pick up that phone? Why weren't the authorities involved at that point? At that point, they all knew that young Nolan had not come back. They knew that he was missing. So why did the family have to go and retrieve that phone? Why did they have to even figure out where it was? To me, these are just questions about the veracity of the investigation from beginning to now. Because it is still reported that one of the officials, one of the authorities, law enforcement people, I believe it was the sheriff, initially said, after Nolan's body was found on the shore of Horn Island, he, within the same day, announced publicly that there was no foul play, which was a real problem for the family because they knew that the authorities had not had time to investigate anything. And so, as this moves along, and we pray that it doesn't take a long, long time because they're still waiting toxicology reports. Even the examiner who conducted the second autopsy, Dr. Mitchell, did not have the toxicology reports back yet that he ordered. But time moves on, and so we just hope that some of these questions can be answered soon. And we hope also to see a sharing of information from the Mississippi officials as to what they found in the initial autopsy. Because clearly, having first access, you probably get the better results. I mean, things are more intact, for that first autopsy, as opposed to the second, when, as attorney Ben CRUMP described, all the organs are removed from the body and placed back within a cavity of the body to be sent to the second person conducting the second autopsy. So that there, just that fact limits, what is discoverable in any pure and any pure way, what can be discovered by that second examiner. It's not so much that the first examiner tainted anything intentionally, but just the fact that that person has already taken parts of the body apart and done some examination of the body. It just limits what the second examiner can do, I would think, and conclude. So, again, we hope that the findings are not misaligned. Because if they come back and they say the same thing or show the same results, then we can believe that that's true, whether it points to foul play or not. And that is one thing that Attorney Ben Crump and the family have said repeatedly. They just want to know what happened. They are not pushing an agenda one way or the other. They are not insisting on foul play. They are not even looking so much at the racial component. But if the facts lead in that direction, they say, that is the direction they will move in. And that leads me once again to just talk just briefly about the location and about the fact that this all happened in Mississippi, where there is a history, of course, of racial strife, of the unaliving of African American people. We have Medgar Evers, the famed civil rights leader who was killed there. We have the 3 civil rights workers who went down there to help Mississippians register to vote at a time when Blacks were being threatened if they did vote. Those 3 civil rights workers, I'd like to mention their name: James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, murdered in Mississippi, 1963, their bodies buried, hidden, and there was a cover-up that involved many law enforcement people and many prominent people in that community. That is the history of Mississippi. We don't tell it to paint the story either way, but we just want to provide the context. And in this age of information, you want all the information that you can get to help you figure out what happened to this young man. And we cannot forget young Emmett Till, who was killed, murdered down there. Young 14-year-old Black boy visiting from Chicago, whistles or makes some comment about how a white woman who he thought was attractive. And of course, his not knowing, the way of the South, and certainly not the way of Mississippi, he did that. And the Klan, or those associated with the Klan, would go to that home where he was visiting his relatives that night, pull him from that house, and murder him. And of course, his body was found waterlogged. He had been thrown into some body of water, and his body was so decomposed that his mother could hardly recognize him. So this is the history of Mississippi. And when we look at what has happened to young Nolan, out on a vacation, on a weekend, 4th of July weekend with 3 white friends, where they headed to an island that's only accessible by boat. And Nolan is the only one who does not come back. And they have his cell phone, and Nolan turns up dead a couple of days after the 4th. And we do also want to mention his athletic abilities and the future that lay ahead of him. Some are suggesting that some of these friends may not have been as supportive of his bright future as you might think. And so as we search for motives for something like this happening, all of that must be considered. So that's all I have tonight on the new developments with young Nolan. Just housekeeping type things. There is now a $125,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and or conviction in this case. Reverend Al Sharpton of National Action Network offered the first $50,000. Filmmaker Tyler Perry offered the second $50,000, and Terrell Owens, a former NFL football player, offered $25,000. So celebrities and athletes continue to speak up and speak out, not only with their words, but also with their funds. So, for the family, I'm sure this is a big, tremendous help. And they continue, Nolan's parents, to express their gratitude for such kindnesses that have been shown to them. So we're going to leave that there. And I'm just going to turn to, I just needed to mention a couple of developments on other immediate news. I just learned that you remember the weaponization fund, the anti-weaponization fund that your president, the $1.776 billion that he wanted to set aside and give to the January 6th rioters who stormed the Capitol. I just learned tonight that fund has not been eliminated. And I was watching the congressional interview of the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, who wants to become the permanent Attorney General for the United States. I was watching them interrogate him, and that was one of the issues that came up. Now, if you'll recall, a judge froze that fund, which is amazing to me that there's even $1.8 billion just laying around for them to give to the rioters. But apparently there is. There's supposed to be money's supposed to be short for food and for housing and for health care. But there's $1.8 billion sitting in a fund waiting to pay these thugs who stormed the Capitol. And from the interrogation of Blanche, it appears that fund has not been shut down completely. And this administration is very good for ignoring what the judges tell them to do. Because the judge ordered that that fund be frozen, and that they put in writing a cancellation order for the fund. But apparently that cancellation has not materialized, and it is discovered that that fund might still be operational. This is something for you to think about as an American taxpayer and just as an American citizen. Do you want your money going to the people who stormed the Capitol and who threatened law enforcement officers on that day who were guarding the Capitol and who were guarding our legislators who were in there trying to certify the election of Joe Biden? You know, you'll remember these people threatened to kill Mike Pence, to hang him, the vice president at the time, Trump's vice president, and to kill Nancy Pelosi, who was the Speaker of the House at the time. That's how deadly that day was. Yet this president continues to call it a day of love and continues. Even after pardoning them on day one of his second administration, he wants to give them money. So I had to mention that because I just discovered that news this afternoon. Also, a troubling new development is that the Department of Justice has announced that it is no longer going to investigate any killings by the ICE agents. Any. That they're not even going to investigate them. I just saw that was breaking news tonight, and that story is still developing, so I don't have many more details on that. But it's very troubling that ICE is immigration and customs enforcement, and they are the ones that are picking people up off the street and putting them in detention and then deporting people. And you've seen the rough tactics that they use. And now this ruling, this announcement from the DOJ will pretty much give them a free hand to treat people as brutally as they choose. And I saw that Representative Jonathan Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson's son, likened it to a return to Jim Crow. When, this kind of thing, you hate to call them law enforcement because they're not technically behaving as law enforcement people. But he likened it to a time when citizens were just not safe. And he remembered, those supremacist groups that could just attack people at will. And so are we moving backwards to that time? And what will we do, to stop that kind of regression, that backward moving that this country seems to be doing right now? Of course, we're all looking toward the midterms, but each day it seems that the Trump administration does something that makes you wonder if we'll even make it to the midterms as a democracy intact. And finally, I'll conclude with your Secretary of War went before the Congress today to ask for more money for the war against Iran. If you will recall, he and the president said several months ago that Iran had no ability to fight, that they had been almost obliterated, was the word they used quite a bit. Not only had their nuclear capability been obliterated, but they had no military capability to fight back. They were expected to be surrendering at any moment, and this was like 3 months ago. So he's back before Congress asking for more money for a war that they didn't even declare as a war at first. And neither of them, this is the only time that they have come to Congress to ask for more money. They never asked for permission to engage this country in this war. And 3 other lives have been lost. 3 other U.S. military soldiers, their lives have been lost. And the New York Times has reported that casualties are being deliberately underreported by this administration. So Iran, the war that we were enticed to enter because of your president's relationship with Netanyahu of Israel, that war continues to be ours. As United States citizens are being asked now for even more money to keep that war going. That's going to conclude this edition of Faith, Family, and Political Affairs. Do keep your eyes on the developments in the case of young Nolan Wells. We are in solidarity with his parents, and we believe that they will get the answers that they deserve. And in the words of Ben CRUMP, we just repeat justice for Nolan Xavier Wells. Thank you for tuning in tonight. And we hope to see you in our next Zoom event.